In ancient Sumer, Dumuzi, the shepherd king and god of vegetation, embodied the earth's vitality and the abundance of the harvest. As autumn took hold, his story of sacrifice echoed the changes in nature, symbolizing the land's shift from bounty to barrenness as the harvest season drew to a close and the earth prepared for its rest. This myth, over 4,000 years old, reflected the Sumerians' understanding of nature's cycles and the delicate balance between life and death. Dumuzi's love for Inanna and his descent. Dumuzi's story intertwines deeply with that of Inanna, his beloved. When she returned from her journey to the underworld, Inanna was shocked to find Dumuzi not in mourning but seemingly untouched by her trials, enjoying his life in her absence. In a moment of fury and betrayal, Inanna condemned him to take her place in the underworld for part of each year, a decision that brought both sorrow and significance to the changing seasons. Dumuzi's descent signaled the harvest's end as the once lush fields and fertile lands grew silent, mirroring his departure. The spring rebirth of Dumuzi. Yet just as nature promised renewal, Dumuzi's return each spring marked a powerful rebirth. His re-emergence from the underworld symbolized the rejuvenation of life, a reminder that after winter's stillness, the earth would once again awaken. This cycle of descent and return became a vital part of Sumerian belief, symbolizing nature's resilience and the assurance that life would blossom anew after each dormancy. Preserving Dumuzi's tale. The ancient city of Uruk, among others, preserved Dumuzi's tale on cuneiform tablets, which were uncovered in the early 20th century and are now kept in places like the Iraq Museum and the British Museum. These artifacts not only capture Dumuzi's sacrifice, but also reveal an intricate mythological landscape where gods and nature were interwoven, each season a reflection of divine action. Echoes of Dumuzi in Tammuz, Adonis and Attis. Intriguingly, Dumuzi's story didn't end in Sumer. As cultures evolved, he was linked with other deities, such as Tammuz in Akkadian mythology, who similarly represented cycles of fertility and decay. In later beliefs, echoes of Dumuzi's myth appeared in the stories of Adonis and Attis, deities who also experienced seasonal deaths and rebirths, symbolizing the rhythm of nature. Dumuzi's journey from life to death and back again serves as a timeless metaphor for the resilience of life and the enduring hope of renewal, a cycle that reminds us even today of autumn's sacrifice and spring's promise. Tammuz, the lamented god of pastoral life. Tammuz, the Akkadian counterpart of Dumuzi, was revered across Mesopotamia as a god closely connected to pastoral life, vegetation, and the seasonal cycles of the earth. Each year, Tammuz's descent to the underworld marked the arrival of the dry season, a time when the land withered and communities faced scarcity. His death was so deeply mourned that women across the region would gather for rituals of lamentation, singing mournful dirges to honor his memory and express sorrow for his departure. This ritual wailing was seen not only as a remembrance of Tammuz, but also as a way to mourn the temporary loss of the earth's vitality. Tammuz's story held a central place in the religious consciousness of Mesopotamian culture, with annual rites of lamentation that embodied the collective grief of the people. His resurrection each year signified the return of life, fertility, and abundance to the land, a cycle that echoed the profound belief that even in death there was always the promise of rebirth. Adonis, the beloved of Aphrodite, and the cycle of death and renewal. In Phoenician mythology and later Greek tradition, the figure of Adonis evolved with themes remarkably similar to those of Dumuzi and Tammuz. Adonis was beloved by Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, who cherished him deeply. However, his life was cut short by a tragic death at the tusks of a wild boar. This event symbolized the earth's decline, as Adonis, representing nature's vitality and beauty, descended into the underworld. In his memory, the Greeks held annual Adonia festivals, where his devotees would mourn his passing with rituals followed by celebrations of his return each spring. This period of mourning and celebration reflected the duality of life and death, as well as the unbreakable bond between decay and renewal in nature. Adonis's story reinforced the cyclical belief that after every winter and every loss, there would be a renewal and an awakening. His tale transcended boundaries, carrying forth the enduring themes of love, sacrifice, and the eternal return of life through successive cultures. Attis, the devoted lover of Cybele and the promise of resurrection. Attis, the Phrygian god of vegetation, has a story that bears striking resemblances to the myths of Dumuzi and Adonis. As the lover of Cybele, the great mother goddess, Attis was intricately linked with the earth's fertility and the rhythms of the seasons. His myth tells of a tragic self-sacrifice. Overcome with guilt and sorrow, Attis castrated himself beneath a pine tree, a death that symbolized the fall of vegetation and the earth's seasonal decline. In Phrygian tradition, his sacrifice was annually mourned with a day of sorrow and ritual lamentation, followed by a day of joy to mark his rebirth. The worship of Attis spread to Greece and Rome, where his rites became part of the spring festival known as the Hilaria. This festival, filled with mourning, resurrection, and jubilation, commemorated the regenerative powers of nature and the indestructible spirit of life. Attis's story encapsulates the belief that through sacrifice and suffering, there is always the promise of revival, a belief that not only defined his worship, but also demonstrated how humanity has long found solace in the eternal rhythms of the natural world. The resurrection of Jesus, celebrated each spring, bears a striking connection to ancient myths of rebirth, tied to the same season, especially the story of Dumuzi. Over 2,000 years before Christianity, the Sumerians told of Dumuzi, a shepherd god who descended to the underworld and returned each spring, symbolizing the earth's renewal. This theme of seasonal rebirth also appeared in the myths of Adonis and Attis, gods whose cycles of death and return were marked by spring's arrival. The parallels suggest that the early Christian story of Jesus' resurrection may have drawn from these ancient symbols of renewal, embedding his rise from the dead within a long-standing tradition of springtime rebirth. In each of these myths, Tammuz, Adonis, and Attis, the cycle of life, death, and rebirth is profoundly expressed, showing how deeply humanity's earliest cultures revered the rhythms of the seasons. The ancient memory of Dumuzi's journey from life to death has lived on, transforming and adapting across time and geography, leaving a legacy that connects us to the past and reminds us of nature's enduring promise of renewal.
The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. In early 1946, in the region now known as the West Bank, a group of Bodin teenagers were tending to their sheep and goats near the ancient settlement of Qumran. To pass the time,
with so many conspiracy theories out there, it's hard to keep track of them all. Welcome to What We Know, where we try to uncover the histories and mysteries of the world by presenting all different theories out there, and the only narrative we push is this. Here's what we know, make up your own mind.
If you enjoy this video and want to see more like it, please consider subscribing to us and hitting the like button. Feel free to write a comment below and suggest which theory you want to see next. If you'd like to further support this channel, please consider joining. Our membership link will be found in the description box below. We appreciate your support, and as always, thanks for watching.